Hello and welcome to another edition of the Waypoint Podcast, where we give you Torah insights from the weekly Parsha. This week's Parsha is Shmini. So we're pressing forward in the book of Leviticus, and beginning in chapter 9, this really just kind of gives us some details on the startings of the priestly duties. Moving into chapter 10, we get the instance of Nadab and Abihu, who bring strange fire before the Lord. They bring incense before the Lord in an improper time. They're then judged for it, and following that, some offerings are put off for a bit of some time. We'll discuss that also. And finishing with chapter 11, we get the dietary laws and all of the specific details on what to abstain from and what is permitted. So with that said, that's our wave tops. I'll hand it over to my colleague Seamus for the wonderful lesson that he has prepared for us.
Hello.
Razzle dazzle.
And welcome to the Waypoint Podcast. As you can see, I am here in the studio, in the flesh.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
So this will be a slightly different, I guess, layout from what we're used to seeing when it comes to this. But without further ado, I still have a lesson, and then we'll actually be able to do this kind of in person and bounce ideas off, afterthoughts, during thoughts even. So feel free to interrupt me in the middle of the lesson if anything comes to mind.
Sweet.
Don't be a stranger in your own home. So I actually wanted to focus. Now this particular Torah portion spends a lot. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time in the Nadav and Abihu episode, right?
Yeah.
The whole strange fire, especially in Messianic circles, everyone loves to really talk about this particular passage in Shmini. And so I'm not actually going to bore you with another lesson on Nadav and Abihu again, with some of the same overarching themes. If you want some of those lessons, you can go elsewhere, I think. But instead, I wanted to give you a different insight adjacent to this particular story. And so what do I mean by that is essentially, I think it's weird, the immediate aftermath of what happens with Nadav and Abihu in the Torah, right? So the immediate aftermath is, of course, Aaron and the rest of his sons are still in the middle of a process that's not complete. They still have yet to eat the last of the sin offering that happens on behalf of the people. And Aaron is not he doesn't have an appetite for it, to say the least, him and his sons. And Moses at first is like, okay, you can't do this. And Aaron gives a fairly cryptic answer, but by and large, the answer is something along the lines of, my heart's not in this. It's not right now. And Moses is content with the answer. And then we're going to get into the part that I really want to focus on, the kosher laws. I think, for me anyway, I think it's very interesting, considering the entire theme of this particular Torah portion, that the kosher laws are juxtaposed with the Nadav and Abihu incident, right? And I'm actually going to tie this all the way back into the concept that we're introduced to at the very beginning. So the first thing I want to kind of point out before we get to that juxtaposition is that this Torah portion is called Shmini, right?
Yeah.
Which means the eighth, really just eighth, in reference to on the eighth day, when the whole everything is being put together for the tabernacle and the priestly order is nearly to its completion. And 8 in Torah, Hebrew mindset, it represents infinity, right? It's not just the sideways 8 that also is that happens to be the symbol for infinite, but it really is the concept of infinity, right? Of the next thing. It's a concept that you can't quite comprehend, the infinite, right? We have a 7-day week, and the 8th day is a symbol of the eternity. It's a symbol of the world to come. It's something that we cannot have here and now, except in very small kind of blips of the taste of it in this reality, but we can't step into the next reality quite yet. And so that I'm going to argue that that's actually the theme of this entire Torah portion, more or less. Even though we have things that seem to have nothing in common with this particular concept. So we have actually a very big thing happen. It almost gets overlooked. Actually, if you're not reading carefully, you'll overlook the fact that at the end of Exodus, what was our main problem? Our main problem is we can't get into the tabernacle. Right. We just built the tabernacle, and the glory of God fills it as soon as the last hammer blow is driven and the nail is put, everything is in place, it's finally built. The glory of God fills the tabernacle. Now you can't get in. That's a problem. So the whole purpose of the next 9 chapters, essentially, of Leviticus is how do we get in? And in the middle of chapter 9, we get in.
Right.
And it's like this small, it's almost overlooked. You'll miss it if you're not looking hard enough. But right there's a point in which Moses and Aaron go into the tabernacle. The Torah uses the tent of meeting. After the tent of meeting that Moses is used to being in, once the tabernacle is built, that phrase gets moved to the tabernacle. And so the Moses and Aaron go into the tabernacle. They've actually achieved the goal of the entirety of the last 8 chapters we've been reading and the entirety of the last half of Exodus in the whole building process. We've actually finally got there, and it's barely mentioned, and it's so easy to overlook. And in the spiritual height of this whole thing, that's when we have the Nadav and Abihu incident. So I think it really puts into context.
Right. It's one of those small details that, like, if you do catch it, it's a huge question now.
Yeah.
But, like, if you don't catch it, then you just didn't catch it.
Yeah, you just, you're like, oh, okay. And so you would actually almost forget that they made it into the tabernacle. They probably went in. It doesn't say what they did when they went in. They probably went to just light the menorah and tend to maybe even the incense altar. Not really entirely sure. It doesn't really say, but it says they got in, which is amazing. And then when they come out, the fire comes forth from inside the tabernacle and lights the offering, the tamid, the continual burnt offering, right? That's important because from this point on, the intention is that every offering would be sourced from that fire. Okay, so that's important with the whole strange fire concept that we're going to get into later, because the idea now is every single offering from this point forward will be sourced from this fire, and then you're not allowed to let this fire go out. And what Nadav and Abihu do is they create a new fire. Essentially, they have a strange fire, a fire that did not come from God, and then they try to come into the tabernacle that way. We know the end result of that, unfortunately. And then now this is the focus of what I wanted to focus on when it comes to this particular Torah portion. Is the kosher laws, and not because I want to go into the details of, this or that, this is kosher, this isn't kosher, blah, blah, blah. It's actually just more the fact that they're there. This could have been set up in a much different way, but I think it's set up this way intentionally. We're finally in, right? We've made it. Everything we've been working towards. And amongst all the hoopla, the elevated spiritual sensitivity, the charisma being felt, we have this small moment, which would seem insignificant, right? The Nadav and Abihu, right. Just bringing, just trying to express love for God, right, in their own way. It doesn't go as planned, and that's its own problem. And then we're immediately followed up by all of the kosher laws. I think that that's not inconsequential. I think that this idea is we're supposed to live between the worlds, right? In the way that it's Shmini, it's the 8th. So we're actually meant to be living on the here and now as though we are the citizens of the next world, right? And that's why we have all these laws in the Torah. These are essentially the laws of citizenship, right?
Right.
And it's not like what Nadav and Abihu did was necessarily sinful or wrong, but it was a breach in the conduct of the kingdom, of the future kingdom, right? And that breach inadvertently it killed them, right? It's just the holiness of God is such that if you approach him and you're unprotected or something is wrong and incorrect, even it would result in your death because you are an unholy person approaching a most holy, it's a very dangerous thing to approach a most holy God, right, without proper protection.
Absolutely.
And I think the reason we have our kosher laws immediately following this incident is a sort of God's way of saying, listen, this is to be your conduct as citizens of the next kingdom moving forward. And regardless of whether the Nadav and Abihu thing happens, the fact that it does happen and we keep moving forward with the kosher laws immediately after that, again, that juxtaposition, at least in the way that I'm interpreting this particular aspect that I've seen, is they tried to do things from outside to sort of bring it in a sense. And that is a breach of the kingdom rules, so to speak. You belong to a different citizenship. The priests particularly are their own citizenship in their own right? They actually have a very particular special duty in the earthly kingdom as well as the heavenly kingdom, of course. But especially here as the intermediaries. And then going forward, right, we've been focusing on the priests for so long that we've almost forgotten about the lay citizens.
Right. And
so, yes, Nadav and Abihu, what they did was incorrect. But that doesn't mean that goes across the board, that it's just for them, right? That this is also for us, that we also need to make sure that we're being very careful in our daily lives to live as citizens of the next world, the world to come.
Right. It's kind of the idea behind the temple in and of itself is separation between the worlds, right? It's that's the waypoint, right? where
it's where heaven and earth kiss.
Right. It's the point where they're separated, and that separation is important. And this is something that Nadab and Abihu were not acting in accordance with, right? Their actions were actually bringing from outside into the separation point between the worlds. And so, like, it follows that we immediately, after that event, receive these instructions on which animals to eat and which ones not to eat. And coincidentally, the ones that you can eat, as far as, land animals go, are the ones that separate the good from the bad in their digestive process, right?
Also true, yeah.
And so, it's just there, that imagery is even there in the animals that we're told are permissible to eat, is this idea of the separation between the worlds. Yeah.
To continue on with that, actually, I like where you're going, because again, it's like this is the area where heaven and earth kind of touch, they kiss, right? It's the two fingers. God reaching out to man in a way. That's what the temple, the altar especially, is that point in which the two can come together. But it's incredibly important that as you approach God, you have to understand the difference between the unholy things and the holy things. You have to make sure that you maintain a level of separation so that you can draw near Karban to him without the threat of accidentally being killed by the fact that you're just not holy enough to be in his presence without protection. Now, you take that picture. The temple is a holy place. Now, we've heard it a bunch of times, but my body is a temple of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
Okay, so this is immediately, Nadav and Abihu, they didn't get it right. They allowed something that wasn't supposed to go into the temple, into that temple, and it was detrimental. And that is a picture of our own temples. And talking about holy and common, separating the two, it's pertinent that you understand what is and is not clean and unclean, and what is allowed to go into your personal temple. As a citizen of the heavenly kingdom, your body is, in effect, you are the high priest of your own body temple. And so it's actually important,
right,
in your daily life to maintain that level of separation.
Yeah, and I think that this actually even breaks down to a relatable level that everybody can comprehend. Growing up, whenever you go out of the house, right? I know your father, my father, very similar in their approach, and it's like, okay, well, you represent this household when you leave, right? So your behavior should be accordingly, right? You should be conducting yourself accordingly, because the way that you act out there is going to reflect on what happens in here, right? And that aspect comes out also with respect to acting as a citizen of heaven
while you're
here on earth.
Yep.
Right. So that this idea of the body being the temple, well, sure. I mean, it's kind of like saying, well, you are your family when you leave the house, right? You're carrying that vessel.
Sure.
You are the vessel that carries that essence, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's I definitely see the imagery there, respective to, now it seems a little arbitrary again what we eat, right?
It seems like it's not exactly a moral issue,
but that's what you're bringing into the temple, though, right? It's a direct reflection actually of, like, who you are inside as a person.
Yeah.
And that's very spiritual in its context, but that's something that's worth pondering. Really sit and think about that, the idea of what we eat and who we are inside.
To your point, the kosher law itself, it even says, do not make your souls detestable by eating these things. And it uses the Hebrew word for souls. It doesn't say, do not make yourselves detestable. It actually says, do not make your nefesh, your soul, detestable by eating these things. So whether we want to admit it or not, whether we're aware of it or not, whether it actually is this way or not, there does appear to be a spiritual implication between what happens when you are or not observing the kosher laws at some level. And again, we're not saying it's immoral to eat bacon, but I think we are trying to make the saying that you are doing something to your temple that should not be done when you do. Now, again, it's not exactly wrong. And the Torah even really admits it's not sinful necessarily, especially for, like, you can sell certain things to Gentiles that aren't clean.
Right.
So it's not necessarily that it's sinful, but if you want to be a member, a citizen of the kingdom, there is a different standard for you now. You now become a temple in and of yourself, and you are the high priest of that temple. And so you need to closely guard what can and cannot go into your bodily temple.
Yeah.
And it's a very practical parasha. It's a very short lesson. I don't exactly plan to be super profound with it. It's just something that I was reading in my own individual reading. I was noticing that I found it weird that it was juxtaposed immediately with the Nadav and Abihu thing. And I think that we tend to focus that as an isolated incident.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it for the first time this week as a broader thing for the human, the person.
Right.
We're finally in. We finally have it. We have the tabernacle. We are in with God. God is in our temple. He's dwelling among us. And then we think we can do certain things our own way that are not prescribed.
Right.
And that is a warning that although it's not exactly wrong, it's not exactly immoral, or it's not even exactly sinful, it's still incorrect. Yeah. And there's a correct way. And so that's what I saw. I was looking at a much more broad spectrum, and that's what I saw. And so that's what I wanted to take away from it.
I'm going to say that actually ties directly into my Haftarah connection.
Afterthoughts. Take it away.
Afterthoughts. Well, no, just the idea of something, right, not necessarily being sinful, but being incorrect. That actually does kind of directly segue into this. So what happens in the example of Nadab and Abihu, right? Because that's where we're going to be focusing. Before I get into that, the connection with the Haftarah here is that David in 2 Samuel 6 is trying to escort the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, right? This is the point at which, interestingly enough, there's the parallels.
Yeah.
We've now got the tabernacle established in the Torah, and now we're beginning the priestly process. Okay, so David is making preparations for the building of the temple in Jerusalem. Right now, David can't be the one to do it. Hashem, tells him you can't got blood on your hands,
yep,
right?
Sorry, it's not that you're wrong. It's just it can't be you.
But he makes all of the preparations, and this is one of those preparations: is to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. Now, on the way, there's some shakiness in transport and Uzzah. So Uzzah, a very noble man, decides to try and rescue the Ark from teetering too hard and potentially falling over. So he touches it. Now, we already know you're not supposed to touch the Ark of the Covenant, right? Yeah. So he died because of it, right? He was struck dead because of it. Now, again, intentions were noble, just like Nadab and Abihu.
Yep.
Intentions were noble, but the holiness of Hashem consumed them because of it. And in this case, the very same thing. I mean, he was absolutely consumed because there was a violation that has an automatic effect, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a physics relationship. And so anyway, be that as it may, David decides to, postpone bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. We're going to just take it to the nearest city that's nearby, and we'll let it sit there for a little bit before we continue forward and bring it to Jerusalem. So what do we see happen in Leviticus here? A very similar situation. Nadab and Abihu, they die, and as a result, right, Aaron postpones the eating of this offering. Right. They hold off on it. They don't finish it. Now, was this a sin? Well, we find out later, no. But was it incorrect? I mean, technically speaking, it's incorrect. And that's what Moses points out. Moses comes to them to tell them, hey, this is not correct. Like, you're not doing this the way that it's supposed to be done. And this is where we see a little bit of letter of the law versus spirit of the law play out in the Torah itself.
Yeah,
right. It's a beautiful thing, because Moshe comes to Aaron and says, hey, you're not doing the letter. The letter is you're supposed to eat this, right? And you're supposed to finish it. Why have you not finished it? Like, why are you not doing the thing the letter says to do? And Aaron looks at Moses and says, mind you, he's in the wake of losing two of his sons.
Yeah.
Right? The Torah reads rather emotionless regarding it, but
yeah.
But he's a father. He clearly loved his sons, and so he wasn't in the spirit to do this service. He wasn't in the heart. This was not something he could do joyfully, which is paramount for the priestly duties. Right? Paramount that they do this joyfully, that they do take joy in their labor, and that is something that carries over for my Tanya students into just observance in general as something you're supposed to take joy in doing.
Right.
So Aaron's answer to Moses was, would it have pleased God if I had?
Essentially, yeah.
Right? He basically just goes, would God have really accepted it if I did finish it? And it's like the light bulb hit Moses, and he had that moment of going, you know what?
He's like, fine.
You're right. Yeah.
He doesn't say you're right, but he goes, you know what? Fine.
So again, even after the postponing of bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem in our Haftarah, it's taken to this nearby town. It's left there. The town is ultimately blessed because of it.
Yeah, because of
its
presence.
Because of its presence, and so it's at this point, right? After the town itself has actually been able to reap some blessing from the presence of the ark being there, now David decides, so let's resume the mission. Let's continue to bring it back to Jerusalem, and then he does so successfully ultimately. So, yeah, that's the Haftarah connection for me.
I like it. That was a good segue. Yeah. So I guess that's your lesson for this week. I hope everyone's Passover was a good Passover.
It was wonderful Passover.
It was a nice, long-awaited, much-needed break, I think. Thank you for joining us here on The Waypoint. If you like the lesson, if it's blessed you, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button.
Definitely ring the bell. You forgot the bell.
Ring the bell.
Ring the bell if you want.
Where the bell is.
More like this. Yeah, I have no idea where the bell is.
Anyway, thanks for joining us here on The Waypoint, and we will see you next week. Shalom.
Shalom.